Happy Monday, everyone. If you're working from home, are you actually working? Ghost engineers in the machine on Techstrong Gang. Happy Monday, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel for Techstrong, and through the magic of internet time dilation, I am still in Las Vegas. Been in Las Vegas for a week, and anyone who goes to Vegas for conferences and work will tell you that a week is too long to stay in Las Vegas. But I'm here, but hopefully by the time you're all watching this, I will be back home and recovering, taking a really, really hot shower to get kind of Vegas off me. But I'm joined here today by a great group of gang members. We'll start off with, he looks like he's home in Alabama. Saw him though over Thanksgiving. Our resident AI professor. Professor John Willis.
Let's not go too far here, Alan.
Okay. Hey, John, how are you, man?
Great to be here. Great to be here with the gang.
Well, I don't think there's any licensing or special test to take to become a professor.
This is true.
So if we want to call you the professor,
fair enough.
It's good enough.
We anointed a czar, so what the hell's a professor?
Yeah, what the heck? The professor's minor. That's kind of easy stuff. All right.
I got to work my way up to czar. So
yeah. Joining John and I from Futurum and Visible Impact, it's our own analyst here, Guy Currier. Hey, Guy, how are you?
I'm great. Good to be here.
Good to have you on.
I did not have to go to Vegas, so my showers have been normal.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I wish. Well, no, you know what? In all honesty, I don't mind coming to Vegas. I just like to spend 3 days, 2 nights here and go home. But that being said,
I don't know. I actually love
productive.
Vegas. And I love the AWS reInvent show.
Yeah,
last week, and and all of that. But also, it's just great to be home sometimes.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And work from home sometimes.
Yeah, speaking from home, our own Tracy Ragan's got her internet straight here and ready to rock and roll. Hey, Tracy, how are you?
I'm doing great, and I like being home too.
Something to be
I do like Vegas, though. If I was going to go to a show, Vegas or New Orleans would be my 2 favorite places to go to a show.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. And then home from Vegas himself, our Chief Content Officer, Mike Vizard. Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm well. I did the 2 days and left. So, you should have come home with me. That's all there is to it. I was thinking about it the other day, though. It's like on average for over the course of 30 years now, I think I've been in Las Vegas about once a month. So there you go.
That's a lot of Vegas.
And I don't think I've been there for more than 3 days at any time.
And not even a statue. A little Godfather reference there. All right. So guys, we've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about, is there such a thing? And what is it? An AI engineer. We're going to talk about CrowdStrike crowing a little bit. But before we get into those, Mike, we were going to talk about ghost engineers.
Yeah, it seems like this past week was the time everybody decided that it was a good time to kick those remote workers. There's a report out of Stanford saying something like 10% of software engineers are ghost engineers and that they don't contribute much to any project. And just to add a little fuel to the fire, I think it was Senator Jodi Ernst has a report out giving the government workers a hard time for being remote workers and not being productive. And of course, it's always easy to kick the government workers these days. There are some folks who think that whole report is a political stunt, but I know you've had some opinions about remote workers over the past year. So, as you look at all of this, what's going on?
So let me preface everything I'm going to say by pointing out that you could be a ghost engineer and be in the office, that classic office space line. He's here 25 years. What exactly does he do? Right. There are plenty of people who make themselves busy in an office, but when you look at their output, they're not real productive. They're just not real productive. And so this isn't aimed strictly at home workers, but I think, call it what it is. This overwhelmingly it's at home workers. And look, I know people myself who've called me up for advice about what to do. They have 2 full-time jobs because there's just, short of being big brother and watching every keystroke and what your time on your computer is and all of these things, it's very hard to track what one does with their time from an at-home or remote job. Um, and quite frankly, if you're really good at generating code, even tracking it by amount of code written is not necessarily indicative of how many hours you're working. And one could say, well, if I get enough code written, what do you care whether I work 4 or 8 hours? Well, if you could get that much code written in 4 hours, think about how much you can get done in 8 hours. And as an employer, I'm paying you for 8 hours. I should get my 8 hours of work. I'm not asking you to give me 8.5 or 9, but if it's 8 or 7 or whatever it is, work the day. And it's a tremendous, we talk about when COVID first came out, a lot of people started working remotely and they had never worked remotely before and they didn't have an off switch. And these guys were working 12 hours a day and 10 hours a day and they were just always on. And that's not sustainable, right? But there were a lot of employers that were rubbing their hands saying, oh boy, I'm getting my pound of flesh out of these people, right? And my money's worth. Well, I think that sort of has passed. And now I think if you ask most employers, yeah, there is some, not a majority maybe, but it is a majority. I think the majority of workers who work remote give you an honest day's work and they work. It may not be 9 to 5 or the times you're on because they may run out to do something for their kids or their spouse or parent or they got something going on and what have you. But they give you a full day's work. But there are a percentage that don't. Whether they're working 2 jobs or they just don't work very much during the day, they're just, they're fat on the griddle, on the machine. And, I'm not pointing fingers at government workers. I think for the most part, government workers are actually overworked and underpaid. And I don't want to give any ammunition to Elon Musk and the other dude, I forgot his name, Vivek, whatever, Ratsumwani. Yeah, coming in, and using that as an excuse to cut government to the bone. So I don't buy that government workers are any better or worse than workers in general on this. But, you know, there's something we need, but certainly we need a better way of saying, hey, if you're going to be remote, how, how do we ensure we're getting the productivity we need?
I was thinking I wasn't going to talk on this section, but I guess that never happens. I want to make a couple of quick points. One is, you're right, Alan, that the productivity is not the government. How many of us have been in large organizations? I remember being in a place one time that was designed by Ross Perot so that you actually couldn't find your way around an EDS business, and you literally couldn't find the bathroom from the cubicle you're working on, and that was by design. This design was you'd look at a place if you weren't supposed to be there. Right. But that wasn't the point. So I'd have to follow the windows. And every once in a while, I'd go by somebody in a cube who'd freak out because all they were doing is playing games all day. Right. And they expected nobody because they were in a corner window area that nobody ever passed by. But the real question is, let's not conflate productivity and how we judge productivity of worker with intellectual property, because those are two distinct things in this topic. Right. productivity is productivity. Like your company should be responsible for gauging and I mean, the kind of contracts I've had at like Red Hat and places like that, right? Like it's very clear what your goals and specifics are, and then it's really clear about IP and confidential information. So I think the real question then is if you're going to have 10 jobs, you got to figure out how to get your productivity. You got to figure out what's in your contract, and if the company isn't providing a very concise contract on what your contracts are, and then more importantly, your liability as a young person who thinks they can do this like 10 job stuff, and the minute your name gets attached to something that pops up as an IP right problem, all hell's going to break loose.
Well, all of this annoys me. The one thing about the research and GitHub, when are we going to stop measuring a person's productivity by GitHub? It is not the way to do it. I mean, developers, I was a developer for a very long time. Did I spend all day coding like a machine? No. I can remember weeks that I brought some kind of package in that we were trying to use, and we couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. And I spent the entire week in a debugger. Did I commit any code at that point during that week? No, I didn't. I can think of days that I've spent in meetings with end users. So it's unfair to judge anybody's performance by GitHub. In fact, we had a customer that added that to Deploy Hub to try to track who was doing what, how many pull requests were created. And we do that in the open source community too, but it's not a good judge of a person's productivity. It's a terrible
way GitHub
judge.
is being, Tracy, the way GitHub is being used though here is as a to represent coding as a whole across the world.
There's a crazy assumption that developers do nothing but code.
Well, right. So
Right.
I think problem level one is what you're describing, which is this data set representative?
And I would
data
say
set being the GitHub
emphatically,
reference.
no, it's not.
Yeah.
It is not. And the other thing is that what you'll end up with is on a team, there's different personas. There is the developer, male or female, who doesn't want to be in meetings, so all they want to do is code. And they sit in the corner and they code like a machine. And they're really good at it. But they're terrible at doing other things. They're terrible at testing their code. They're terrible at even managing what they're putting in their code sometimes. And so you have to have somebody evaluating that code, doing code reviews. So there's so many different roles in the developer, world that you can't judge it. And it annoys me. I get so annoyed with the Linux Foundation because everything we do is based on GitHub pull requests. Well, what about the people who are doing DevRel, who are writing blogs, who are going out and doing talks? They're developers, they're working really hard, but they get no credit because it's not in GitHub. So this is a pain point for me, and it irritates me that this is being a judge for developers because it's simply wrong.
Yeah, what strikes me about this, frankly, is it seems so obviously intended to grab headlines and notice. To get this headline number, 10% of all software engineers suck, and to be honest,
but 10% of all people suck at something.
That's what I was getting at. So is 10% high or is it low? To be honest, 10% actually, I worked at a large multinational company, and I would say 1 out of 5 people I worked with were just what I call pushing pixels around. The famous cases of people showing decks in meetings, no slides of which they created themselves. So they're just sort of communicating from meeting to meeting, acting as though they're doing things when in fact they're not. They're just they are they're people like in the Office Space analogy. I'm a people person, right? So 10%. Just on its face, even to attract attention and the proverbial eyeballs and to highlight Stanford University or whatever it is, or this particular researcher, there's a few good things in here, but that headline number and this claim is not one of them. It's taken out of context. We don't know if 10% is good or bad. They just make it out like it's bad. What do you want? 100% of software coders to be competent, capable, and productive? That's, what percentage is good?
Mhm.
So, but let me be clear here. We all have our God-given abilities. And Guy, you may be a better software engineer than me. And John Willis may be better than you. And so if we line up 10 of us, I may be in that bottom 10%. And there are some organizations that say, hey, you should trim the bottom 10% of your org every quarter and replace it so that you're constantly upgrading your team. That's not what I'm talking. I don't think that's what this is about. I don't think that's what these studies are about. I'm talking about there is a group of people that are deceiving and taking money under false pretenses, right? Taking a full-time job when they already have a full-time job, saying that they're working full-time when in fact they are not working full-time. They actually spend 3 to 4 hours a day at most working, and that's deceitful, and that's stealing. That's not just being bad.
Then that's shame on the manager, right? If the
Right.
manager hasn't seen that, I mean, especially in the remote situation.
But-
OpenMake Software and Deploy Hub, we've always done remote. We've never really, only for a very short period of time did we think we should have an office, and then we got rid of it. And yes, there were times I had to fire people who were working remote because they were not producing. But I knew what they could produce and I knew what they were producing, and I had to get rid of them. Is it fun? No. But that's what the job of a manager is. You have to make those calls. So are you making your deadlines? Is the project on schedule? Do you have somebody that you're carrying that you don't want to? That is the manager's job to sort out. And if a manager's not taking care of that, then it's certainly not the job of Elon Musk and Ramaswamy to do that. And in my opinion, that is the description of a deep state. Somebody who is taking a government role, who is not appointed or elected, and is making massive changes to people's lives. That is deep state.
And I just wanted to
John?
say why I started off with, I think, the conflation. So this whole conversation conflates productivity and intellectual property. And leadership, to your point, productivity is productivity. And I think we went in the right direction of covering all the terrible ways, including the McKinsey report, all the sort of DX stuff, space, does not correctly measure productivity. We don't really have a good grasp on how to measure productivity in knowledge work. And then, but I think this conversation about fraud, or to Alan's point, dishonesty, is also an intellectual property problem. Again, who cares if you're productive and you don't like conflate IP or confidential information? I mean, it's your time is your time. Every contract I've ever written, it's very clear what I'm going to do for you, what I'm, and what my time and things are. The first thing I dissect a contract, and everybody does, right? Dissect a contract. But I want to be really clear that when I work for you, this is what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do other stuff as well. And you don't know.
But that's a contractor. That's not a full-time employee.
No, every employee has a contract. It's just
Yes.
the question
And
of
so when I have an employee this is something my kids would
my
tell
son
me.
signed your contract. I reviewed
Yeah,
it.
no, I get it. But my kids would say, look, if I do the amount of work you expect me to do and it only takes me 3 hours instead of 7 hours, what difference does it make? You should be happy I do it in 3, and this way I have time to do other things. But as an employer, I will tell you, hey man, I'm paying you for 7 hours. And if you finish that in 3 hours, again, shame on the manager for not giving you enough work, but I'm entitled to my 7 hours.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Now,
that's
am
how
I?
that's how, as an employer, that's how I feel about it.
But
Yeah.
I think the challenge is definitely on the managers, and there's a lot of managers who don't know how to manage a distributed workforce. They prefer to have everybody locally because it's easier for them to manage by walking around and kind of see what's going on, and they have a better feel for it. But the fact of the
And
matter
if
is,
that's how they're managing, then they are not doing their job, because they will make some somebody who's really good at not doing work will make friends with that manager and get away with murder. And that
This is
happens.
this
It happens all the time.
this is true, and the trade-off for that is, look, the best talent isn't always going to be within a 2-hour drive of your office. So, you're limiting your pool. So at the end of
And
the day,
bingo.
you've got to kind of figure out as a manager how to make all this stuff work and, make sure everybody's putting in the full hours. But this is called the modern world we live in. And if you
Yeah.
can't
I
cope with
mean,
it,
look,
then
I'll tell you as an employer, right? And I've been an employer for many years. There's a balance because people are people. John has to take his wife to a doctor, God forbid, or something's going on, especially when people are working remote, right? I'm meeting my girlfriend for lunch.
I'm
You
doing
know,
my laundry.
I'm doing my laundry, right? And you could be like, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing your laundry on
Yeah,
company
but
time." Oh, bullshit. That's not the way the world works today, right? But I think I've developed, and Mike, you and I have worked together a long time. I've developed a sense of who actually works full time and who, frankly, doesn't. And I usually look to move those people out because I just don't feel like we're getting an honest day's work out of them.
But here's what I'd like to ask John and Tracy, because I think it's what I would like the audience to understand, which is a deeper question, which is why software engineering and app dev has been so obsessed for so long with productivity. And I kind of mean obsessed. It's a constant topic. And all these kinds of metrics and measurements, lines of code is one of them. This particular study provided some qualitative measurements.
okay.
What is it that creates this obsession? Because I don't really see it in other branches of engineering or for other job functions.
Yeah, I mean, good because it's bits and bytes. It's knowledge work, right? It's the industrial engineering, industrial economy work versus knowledge economy work, right? Like it is very hard to measure productivity in economy work, right? To have quantitative metrics. And again, I just pinged Tracy on chat. As you saw it, like things like SpaceX from GitHub, they're terrible. They don't equate to the bottom line. So yeah, I mean, I think I think like Nathan Harvey over GitHub, who's inherited Dora, and like every time I rant on Dora, Nathan will grab me and rightfully so say, John, we use these metrics to start conversations at Google. And I'm like, yep, you win, I lose. So I think we're just I think we have to be better at understanding why we use quantitative. We don't use enough qualitative. And I'll say one last thing to Alan's point too is that like the world is changing, right? I mean, a gig economy, it is going to be more transactional. You're going to find more workforce, people you're going to hire that literally, this is what you're going to want me to do, even as an employer. I mean, workforce automation companies are gearing up heavily for gig economy workers, and gig economy workers are going to be transactional. So like this is what I got you to do. I'm going to do, and if I sort of do it, I'm going to get paid for it. And the
Right.
relationship is going to change from our traditional. What are you doing now? And not you. I know I've worked for you. You're not like that at all. But like that whole what are you doing now? Well, where is Susie on Wednesday? Like who cares, right? So anyway, I'd like to hear
So,
Tracy.
so John, to that point though, that's project oriented, right? If I hire you to do a project and I say this project's going
But
to
I'm
get
saying
done
you're going
by
to be
X
forced
date,
to hire people in the
well,
future.
and
Workforce automation
maybe
tools
that's the
are.
thing to do. If you hire remote people, they're project oriented rather than just,
Mhm.
I think they're just going to be transaction oriented, and I
yeah.
think that's going to be the norm. But
So my pet theory here is, and then I'd love to hear what Tracy's thought is, but my pet theory here is that too many of these managers over the decades have experienced millions of lines of code created that had no valued output or died or crashed and became obsessed and worried with hiring big teams because software cost is very front loaded in putting together stuff and very worried that the stuff would just never release.
Oh, I think that there was a period of time that we thought especially in monolithic development, that we thought we could just throw people at the problem and more coding was better, right? And there really is this image that we all just have to be sitting at our computers and typing on the keyboard and creating some kind of code. And that's not always the best solution for getting a product out the door, right? And I believe that we still have that image. A lot of managers, middle managers, they're suspicious because they don't know how to look at some code and understand if that code was written well, or if it was productive, or if the 5 lines that they produced was better than the 50 lines somebody else produced, right? So the 5 lines of code that was written beautifully, that has no bugs in it, gets a lower value than the 50 lines of code that somebody wrote, that 5 lines of code person's going to have to go correct. So throwing people at the problem has never been the way to solve productivity. And this is some of my issues with like Copilot. It's just like, we just want to generate lots and lots of code, but that's not software development. It really isn't. Software development is so much broader than just writing code. And we continue to look at it from how many lines of code. And that is the dumbest way to look at it. And you know, in terms of the remote, the government in particular, let's look at New Mexico. We have Los Alamos and Sandia Labs here. We have Kirkland Air Force Base, who's got a huge business in Space Force. If they try to rely on the community of New Mexico alone, they'd have to shut down Los Alamos, to be honest. They would have to shut down Los Alamos because there's no way that they're going to bring in the kind of specialized technologists that they need for those jobs from Santa Fe or Albuquerque. Not going to happen. And not everybody wants to move to Santa Fe or Albuquerque, and they'll pass up on those jobs. So, and that's for every single employer. We want those specialized technicians, those specialized engineers, but we can't force them to move to the place where the company is. It just isn't going to happen anymore.
Agreed. Anyway, hey, we've gone way over on this one. We've got to talk about 2 other topics here today. So let's take a break here on Techstrong Gang. We're going to be back and we're going to talk about AI engineering. You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Modernize your business to fuel innovation and elevate customer experiences. With the Builder Community Hub, AWS and its partner network provide essential tools for transforming applications and infrastructure to fully leverage the cloud. Discover free trials, in-depth demos, and essential resources to empower DevOps engineers and developers to deliver value faster and more reliably. Visit the Builder Community Hub to learn more.
Hey everybody, we're back, and as Alan was saying, we're going to have a little chat about, well, what does it mean to be an AI engineer? We have an article about that up on techstrong.ai. We ask you all to go check that out. But John, I'm scratching my head these days, and here's my dilemma. Everybody who's a software engineer is going to wind up working with AI. So why would I have something that is distinguished as an AI engineer when I think every software engineer is going to be an AI engineer, kind of, sort of? So, I mean, what's the difference between what we're calling software engineers / DevOps engineers and AI engineers?
So first off, let's say this is why I have no hair. I've been scratching my head my whole career. But anyway, no, I think this is really interesting. And I read that article, and I think he did a really good job. I guess it's Avtar Surathan. And I think, but like there's this whole swirling thing going on right now. And it sort of relates to what Tracy said at the end of her thing about AI and how we bled into productivity. I think that, the first sort of question is, like there's like 3 people are talking about the AI engineer, right? So that's the new sort of phrase, right? There is an AI engineer, and I think the reaction of most people is either this is, stay out of my way. I'm just going to build stuff now because I can. There are people sort of in the middle who are trying to figure out, okay, what's the sort of balance here? There's things like DevOps, there's security, there's all this stuff. And then there's the people who I can't do that because it hallucinates, right? And nobody's correct here. And so that article, one of the things it talked about is that it added some like glass half full, I believe, because, okay, we can go fast. And one of the side effects is that we can be more opinionated, possibly, about how we deliver stuff. And he calls it, the complex or condensing or collapsing the stack. And that's interesting. The collapsing the stack, I think, is, we don't go all the way to no code, but we go to like, okay, do I really, like Andrew Clay Schaefer always says, let's make the right thing the easy thing, or the easy thing the right thing. I can never remember which one he starts with. But like, I think we have this opportunity to reduce technical debt. Platform engineering is clearly, as I see people migrate from Jupyter notebooks to platforms, that's happening. And I think so we get some productivity gains, but we still have this bigger question of like, okay, we're going fast. We're getting people to consolidate maybe on languages and stacks, because now they're less concerned about, should I use Java? Should I use Stream? Should I use, what front end, what back end? Like the whole idea of having an organizational structure of like back end people being in Minnesota and front end people being in Dallas, right? That's gone, right? We're no longer that nonsense. All right, so that's one thing. And Patrick DeBar has a great presentation he recently did for this AI DevCon, and how AI is changing products. And he makes this really interesting point that I think everybody's missing. The productivity, the tools and the productivity and the evolution of like things like Copilot and Cursor and Aider and all these tools now that clearly make it easier to write code, easier to write tests. But he pointed out loud, there's we're starting to see this evolution of these tools, like saying, allowing to pull in the doc, the requirements. So like in Cursor, you can say @Jira, and you can pull the Jira tickets. And so there is this opportunity. So while this gentleman says it's about collapsing the stack, I'd say there's sort of paradox here. It's actually about collapsing and expanding. So now, because we have these massive context windows, hopefully everybody's still with me, I cannot, when I'm asking our code, I could, in the context, add the business requirements, the security requirements, all the design requirements. I can add in the documentation. I can even give some sense of how this service is operated from the incidents. And think of all the test requirements, not just testing, but code coverage. And if I put that all in context when I'm trying to ideate new code, this is a plus. I mean, it doesn't solve this stuff just generates code willy-nilly, but the glass gets a little more than half full, because all the things we've been terrible at, the non-functional requirements, the things like that, we sort of like DevOps has been screaming that you need to do. Now to Andrews, we make the right thing the easy thing. And what is the right thing? There's a collapsing of the stack, reduces technical debt, and we're building in sort of an invitation, or even the tools recommended. Hey, have you pulled in the doc? Have you pulled in the requirements? And again, I know what Tracy's going to say next, but it is, but I don't say that solves the problem. That isn't like check mark done. But I do believe, to Patrick's point, and we should put a link to his presentation, I think we have this opportunity to clean some of the messiness that DevOps promised for developers and software engineering. And then one last thing is, I think as we talk about the new AI engineer, we need not to forget about the good or best practices that we've been proclaiming for at least 10 years about the best for a software engineer.
Well, I think the interesting part of that article, what caught my attention most, was this idea that we as developers, and maybe an AI developer has to be better at it, as being more customer centric. Really writing software with the customer in mind. If an AI developer is better at that, I'm so happy, because as a software developer myself, I think I suck at it. I get caught up in the tech and I forget about who I'm writing it for. So yes, let's be more customer centric, and maybe AI developers need to be, because in that article we talked a little bit about whose responsibility was it if AI goes wrong, right? Where's the lawsuit? Oh, it was asked, if a car, if your Tesla you're driving autonomously gets a ticket, whose responsibility is it? Is it Elon Musk's responsibility? Is it Tesla's corporation responsibility? Whose responsibility is it? So AI will make us be more customer centric. Huh?
To a certain
I mean-
extent, that question's been answered, right? If you get a red light ticket, from one of those remote cameras, the owner of the vehicle is responsible because the camera can't necessarily tell who's driving or know who's driving. But you, as the owner of the vehicle, are responsible, and you get the ticket.
But that's a false flag argument.
So wait, John.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
just want to say something, Mike, real quick. Is that the idea that like AI software is going to create new liabilities? Software creates liabilities. I mean, the Air Canada, the one he quotes in the article, that actually, my guess based on some forensic, it happened 2 years. If they were using GPT-2 at Air Canada, I don't think that was. In other words, that was basically code that looked like a co-pilot. I don't think that was AI based. And so the point was that was software. So her argument about AI causing this crazy thing that's going to destroy the world because it's going to create new liabilities, software has been Knight Capital. Knight Capital, somebody missed a comma, and basically a company lost like $400 million in 45 minutes and was second largest high frequency trading algor on NASDAQ, was out of business in a day, right? And there was no AI involved in that. So I think we got to be really careful. Will it create more opportunities for liability? Absolutely. But software by itself creates liabilities.
All right.
I thought that
Wait. We're running time on short here, and I got to get this one in. John, we spent most of this week with Amazon, and there was AI all the time. And as we look at this condensed stack, are any of the vendors getting better at providing that, or is it just a mishigash of APIs and hope for the best?
There's a great article, and I'll send it to you. I was going to send it to you. It's basically a whole discussion about model wars and predictivity of the model wars and the marketing involved, and even like is OpenAI going to have to rename GPT because the next version won't be generalized pre-trained transformers, right? And then how everybody's staging the delivery of their models. So part of everything with Nova is a lot of marketing, and I'm saying the technology isn't solid, but like everybody is like this idea that we're faster and better today, like blink tomorrow, it doesn't matter. Because right now Google's like, if you read this article, Google's already like trying to figure out like when's the best time, because last time it didn't work out well. So even and GPT-5, there's a whole article with Sam Altman about like the cat and mouse stuff they're playing on when to announce GPT-5. It has nothing to do with the technology, right? So when I look at what Amazon did last week, most of that is positioning of when do we announce, when do we do this, what was the best time. There was a lot of work, but there are some technology substance behind it. One is their new chips and the new chipset that was in sort of stealth mode, the Tranium, which tells you a little bit. Yeah, right. So that's, I think that's fascinating. Their guardrail stuff. And I know, like, I think the interesting thing that me and Joseph Anak's a sort of a Techstrong part of our Techstrong, what we call the hackathon we did. He's pointed out recently in an article about one of the biggest things he liked is this FOL, this, following logic. It's like predicate based stuff. And so it's interesting that their guardrails might be better than the other, like the Vertex. I don't know, because they've got like, again, this FOL stuff is really, really interesting for RAG validation. So I think, to me, the models are just noise. Yes, great. Bedrock, I don't think has gotten any better. All right, they got models that are competing. Great. They're still confusing everybody with their relationship with Claude. But the real interesting thing is the sort of the stealth chip stuff and this FOL stuff.
Let me step back here a second, though. John, Tracy, Guy, everything you're saying, I'll give you a given. Is AI real? Yeah. Is all of these things, it's a little bit of a one step forward, two step back, and there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Yes. But I remember something, John, and you'll remember this. When I first launched DevOps.com, there were a lot of people out there who were like, what the hell is this guy doing? And one of the questions of the day is Is there such a thing as a DevOps engineer? Should that be a job? DevOps engineer. And people like Patrick, John, and Andrew, and yourself, and Damon, you guys were weighing in. And it's too long ago for me to remember, but some of you said, yes, there is such a thing as a DevOps engineer. And a lot of people said, bull crap. There's no such thing as a DevOps engineer. And why are all these people advertising for DevOps engineers? This is the same question to me 10 or 11 years later. Should we start seeing jobs for people called AI engineers?
I think it's
And
wrong.
I'm asking you, John Willis.
Yeah, no, I think I was totally against, because the silo effect. The whole idea of DevOps was unite. The sort of the graphic of the developer and the operations having a wall in front of it. Another Andrew Clichéism, and like by calling it a DevOps group or a DevOps team or a DevOps engineer, it sort of defeated the whole purpose of what we were trying to do, is create collaboration. And I think an
Yep.
AI engineer, and like it worked. Like it got everybody thinking about this. Patrick is writing articles about how he's going to start figuring out productivity, which he's doing some God's work there. So maybe sometimes even DevOps. Should we even call it DevOps anymore? So sometimes words work and sometimes words don't. I personally believe it's software engineer. I think software engineer is what we call it, because it is software delivery, and the tools we use, pre-Gen AI, post-Gen AI, and whatever the next like Sam Altman-ish non-GPT version of this stuff is going to look like, it's still going to be software engineering.
Well, a front-end developer and a back-end developer are both software engineers.
What about
So
a
an
full
AI
stack
engineer could be a
developer?
kind of a software engineer. I think it runs across the stack. I don't know about it condensing the stack exactly, but this idea that the core, I thought the story buried the lead. I thought it was excellently written article, but I thought it buried the lead. I thought Tracy hit it, which is this function of being concerned about how the AI service or services fit into the stack for a particular application or set of applications is one that has to be focused on the outcome. We have been saying for so long, you can't just run AI, it needs human intervention. Needs human review, and your user is your ultimate human reviewer. So if there is such a thing as a function of being concerned about AI, whatever you label it within the application, that is the right focus. What's the outcome?
But he missed the point in that it isn't about collapsing or condensing. It's about condensing. It's a paradox. The expansion is, how do we use AI to include the other things like GRC, like requirements, like those things? And I think that's where he missed the point, is that, at the end of the day, how do you get, like, it's easy to ask a developer to say, I need customer success, or like, yeah, that's as easy as the developer productivity to figure out. Like, if you have the magic bullet for that one, you're a trillionaire. The real answer behind that, where he missed the boat, in my opinion, is the way to get customer success. What is that? That's quality. Where do you get quality? You get it from like your governance requirements, your GRC, your security, your performance. And like, if we can use AI to inform us that, as like I said, what Andrew says, make the right thing the easy thing, then we get. So if he tells a story of condensing the stack, I don't agree with that. I think you have to expand and collapse the stack.
Well, everybody's a software engineer. Everybody starts as a software engineer, and then we start specializing. Somebody discovers they're really good at front-end design. Somebody's really good at understanding platform engineering. Somebody else is really good at understanding how to automate the factory floor. And then, when I was working in industry, we all were on the same team. And suddenly we realized that some of those roles could be rolled up to a higher level, but we're still all software engineers. Maybe we were doing change management at the time, which ended up becoming DevOps, or maybe became operations, people. But we were all we're all software engineers. That is the truth of it. And we all have different specialties, just because and to a point in our earlier segment, somebody becomes a really good front-end designer and they spend 3 weeks designing the system and use Figma and check in one file. They're going to be seen as somebody who's not productive. So it's all software engineering, but it's not all coding. It's not all just hands on the keyboard. There's so much to be done, and there's so many jobs around this process of developing software. And we are all software engineers, that we don't necessarily have to identify each other as in particular areas, because in the end, we're all developing software, regardless if we're doing a DevOps, we're working on our Jenkins workflow, or we're working on Figma to design a beautiful system.
And Amazon figured that out with the two-pizza team, and then you got like there's a number of really good
Spotify and
yeah,
stuff like that too.
So yeah, I mean, so again, I think the idea is that there isn't really, and again, like I said earlier, I mean, the idea, I don't think you're going to hear a company will say, oh, by the way, that floor is the back end engineers, and this team over here on floor 34 is the front end engineers. Like that, it just, these tools are going to blend so much. Does it mean that you need UX? I mean, again, look at the DevOps story, right? Originally, the concern was the testers were going to hate DevOps because they were left out. And I think what the community did really well is, no, come join us. We're not replacing you. We want you to join in this sort of collaborative way of doing things, because it looked like it was just developers and operations originally. And that was just sort of the poster child for how to create collaboration. So, but I think
we're overtime on this one though, guys, and we still got one more to go. So let's take a break here. I'm going to be the break engineer. And you're watching Techstrong Gang. We're coming back with our final segment of the day, so stay tuned.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
All right, folks, we're back, and as promised, we're going to talk about CrowdStrike, which is a bit of a follow-up on a conversation we've had multiple times now, but CrowdStrike has revealed that it has retained 97% of its customers in the wake of that infamous outage. And Guy, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because a lot of us were saying at the time, people are going to flee and maybe not so much. And why did they stay?
Well, I think that's a good result for CrowdStrike. We'll start with that. It's defensively good. 97%, their typical retention is, I guess, 97.5. That's what they say. So 97 versus 97.5, that's not too bad. It was interesting that they positioned an ultimately 12% loss in market cap as a good result. I think most people would prefer not to lose any market cap. It was down by 24% and then rebounded. So that's kind of bad. With their market cap, that's something like $9 billion in value lost. That can't be good. But what really, when I dug down into the release and what they were talking about, they may have retained customers, but they clearly lost in terms of renewals. They clearly lost in terms of a certain amount of position with their existing customers. Their growth slowed, and that's a loss of about $250 million when you do the math of business that they would have had. All that said, that may not be so bad considering the incident. And I really wonder if we might be reaching the point where perfection is no longer demanded of these cybersecurity companies, so to speak, where there's an understanding that these kinds of breaches and incidents, that it's an ongoing war with a back and forth of the, a proverbial arms race with just like military has been over the centuries, where defenses get better for a while, then offense gets better for a while. CrowdStrike is ultimately a defensive mechanism and a leading one in the industry against threats, attacks, risk, non-compliance, and that sort of thing. And they are exceptionally good at it. And, I note that they did three great things, which were they admitted the problem immediately, they issued a fix quickly, and they made themselves publicly available for comment and, to the government, and because this was, a really serious problem globally. But they're not the first company to have done this. This is what every company has figured out, every security company has figured out to do. Be open and honest about it immediately, because there is tons of expert scrutiny of the industry. Issue a fix as quick as possible, work with competitors as well as partners on continuing to strengthen the defensive side of this ongoing cyber war. They did all of that. I do feel that maybe there was a difference here. I just don't know if that's an industry difference. It would be great if it was, because in that arms race, there are times when the attackers are going to win. Their technology and capabilities, especially now with AI, are going to increase. And the defenders are going to have to catch up to it. And it would be great for the market as a whole to be a little bit more mature about this. One of the things that we've talked about when it comes to cybersecurity and risk for many years is something called ALE, the annualized loss expectancy. Rather than every organization either, being like the don't hear, don't see, don't think about or care about low possibility risks of attack and breach. That they should think about it as an ongoing risk that has a loss that can be calculated. The annualized loss expectancy is that calculation. I may not have an incident this year or next year, but given my chance of incident and the likely cost of the incident, I can just assume that I'm going to lose X amount per year and invest accordingly to lower that amount of loss. That's a mature way to look at it. It's been around for 30 years, 40 years. It still isn't generally used. Instead, people either ignore the problem or expect perfect results. And I like the idea that perhaps the industry as a whole is getting a little bit more mature and a little bit more able to deal with serious problems and breaches like what happened at CrowdStrike with a little bit more finesse and a little bit better understanding.
So I have some thoughts here. Surprised. First of all, look, kudos to George Kurtz and the whole CrowdStrike team, because this was a poster child case of how to respond to an incident. Transparency, timely, thoroughly. So kudos to them. Secondly, this was not a security incident. This wasn't North Korea breached them, or some hackers got in for some financial stuff, or someone injected into their software supply chain some malware. This was plain and simple sloppiness on testing and update that broke Windows. That's what this whole CrowdStrike thing is. They didn't test their update. It made some not kernel. That's kind of Linuxy sounding, but it is. It made kernel changes to Windows, and
Windows
those
kernel,
changes,
Windows kernel.
yeah, and it broke it. It broke Windows and caused the blue screen of death and made it a real son of a gun to try to back it out. You couldn't, and Microsoft has taken steps now that security updates in the future won't be able to break the kernel, and it will be easier to back out. So that's what we're dealing with here. This wasn't a security incident in the true sense of the word, but it was a bad software update. It was bad behavior by our software companies. Every single one of you sitting here goes through this almost on a daily basis. Tracy, how many times do you sit at your desk and say, my God, darn bandwidth provider, it always works until I have to come on here, and it wasn't. But how many times have you changed your bandwidth provider as a result of that? Well, you may not have many choices, but you haven't changed your bandwidth provider. How many times have we gotten fed up with Outlook in Mac until I finally got rid of Outlook in Mac? How many times does any piece of software or technology we've used malfunctioned and we said, God damn it, we're going to change this, I'm throwing them out? And how many times do you actually throw them out? I'll put forth the proposition that 97% of the time you don't throw them out, and hence the CrowdStrike, 97% retention here. As long as they don't do it again or too often, it'll stay that way.
But Alan,
I think
how is there? Go ahead, Tracy.
I was going to say, I think that CrowdStrike, I was the one that said, hey, CrowdStrike's going to be fine. Remember when we first taught it? Everybody has some sympathy that as a software developer, what they went through. I felt really bad for them. But I do believe that CrowdStrike should be looking at their model in a bit here, because they probably shouldn't have the kind of access that they're asking for to these large companies. It's not, it's probably an area that they need to review. Again, who's responsible for that release, right? Did CrowdStrike follow that company's release process, and do they have somebody working for CrowdStrike that is supporting just that company? Is it a consultant in a box? If it's a consultant in a box, you probably are going to have more issues like this, and CrowdStrike will be blamed. I still don't believe CrowdStrike was totally to blame for that process, because if they followed the release process of the customer, then the customer has some responsibility as well. So I really think if I was sitting on the CrowdStrike board right now, I would be asking, are we going to continue having that kind of access to these enterprise production environments?
But it
Because it's not a
wasn't
good
to an
idea.
individual. But Tracy, it wasn't to an individual customer. It was across the entire board.
I
It was
know.
an
And so they have
update to
all of that
Windows.
access is a bad
No,
idea.
and so does every other app that updates Windows. That's
Yeah, I thought he
part
was
of
referring to
Windows
Microsoft
Update.
as yeah.
That's a Microsoft issue.
Yeah, it's a helpful correction to identify for this particular story where the source of risk was, which was not an attack, and I probably shouldn't have used the attack and defense words, but it is still the same fundamental issue. Maybe attack is the wrong approach, but the same fundamental of risk and defense against risk of using these complex stacks, to bring that word back. And the risk may be external from malevolent actors. It may also be internal because of the complexity of the software development and integration process. Either way, it comes down to the same basic point, which I mean, I kind of likened it in my mind to when we started using cell phones a whole lot and dropped calls were a lot more common. We were so used to plain old telephone systems where you always essentially got a dial tone. And then now there were times when you didn't. And the trade-off that you made was that now you could walk around with the phone, but the trade-off was that maybe the phone wouldn't work. And that was
No, you would walk around saying, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?"
Yeah.
But
And so it's gotten better,
how
but
many
it's sort of
people
the same
dropped
thing.
Verizon because of
But
that?
it's sort of the same scenario now where people maybe have the expectation that their Windows system is going to boot properly and all that, or update properly and all that sort of thing, but it doesn't. And it may not be an external risk, it may be an internal risk. Nonetheless, it behooves everybody to think about this and to keep it in their plans individually, that the things may just not work, including Tracy's bandwidth, at times.
John, Mike, you guys haven't weighed in here.
Well,
Nothing?
so I think that the points about the customers and the losses and those types of things, the glass is half full, right? It could have been a lot worse. I think that, they did okay. And maybe they were prepared for things being a lot worse. And they're celebrating the fact that it just wasn't quite as bad as they thought it was going to be. And maybe, I don't know, if we get past this whole issue about how the Windows kernel gets updated, and I think Microsoft is trying to fix that, they might actually get new customers in the future. So I'm
They
not
will.
quite, I'm just, they're in the game.
And I only have one point. I just agree with everything everybody said in terms of all that. I think a guy made a good point, and I'm a real big fan of this, how to apologize correctly, how to be transparent. This has been going on for quite a while. In fact, my friend Mark Imbracchio, I think, created this when he wrote the first public postmortem back, when he was 37 Signals, right? And he did it at Heroku, and then Amazon started doing it for their outages. And then Capital One is a classic, get in front of it. Don't go argue. Don't sort of defend yourself. Just be transparent, explain it. And I think that has a lot to do with, why it's, to Alan's point, you're probably not going to drop them. Capital One, I talked to people there and they said, we wanted this off of the front of Wall Street Journal. We wanted this off of that paper as quick as possible. And the quickest way to do it was take the hit, even though it was actually Amazon's. It was their metadata server. But anyway, long story short, I think
Yeah,
that's
I'm laughing because I worked for a publisher one time, and she had this whole skit in her mind where she would say, "I I always apologize to the customer. I apologize that they feel that way. I'm not apologizing for what we did. I'm just apologizing for the fact that they feel that way."
Absolutely. On that note, let's we're at the top of the hour, man. This was an hour long, 45-minute show today. So Guy, John, Tracy, thank you all for joining Mike and I here on the gang. We'll be back tomorrow, and hopefully I will be back in Boca doing this for tomorrow's show. But until then, this is Alan Schimmel on behalf of Techstrong and the Techstrong Gang. We've got a full day of Techstrong TV following this, and we will have our Techstrong TV coverage from reInvent replaying next week, or this week, excuse me, for you to watch as well. So have a great day, everyone. We're out.